I have noticed this in the past with notices of motion from members of the governing body on the agenda. There seems to be a quality problem. When you look at the agenda itself, it's beautifully clear, very good font and bright colour, but when you go to the notice of motion, it looks like it's the 30th copy in an old Xerox machine, and the font is shrunk down. Could we, I understand that these notices of motion are emailed through, so really should print out exactly the same as the rest of the agenda, but you have a look at that, it's kind of hard to even read it.
We will pick that up.
Thank
I don't think we need to discuss that. We will deal with that. Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Casey, would you like to speak to your notice of motion? And Councillor
I'll
Watson.
try not to go over the points made by the presenters this morning. I'll start by saying, I think it was this presentation that finally said I have to do something here, and it was a workshop we were all at that outlined the activity of the Auckland Council group housing activity. And what bothered me was that housing for older people was in the category called choice, not in the category called supply. And it bothered me that the words that are directing that are in the Housing Action Plan. And it's a plan rather than a policy, because that was what we decided would get through this council quicker. So there never has been a debate, a political debate about the words. And it's simple. The words currently say we will maintain the existing level of council-owned pensioner housing. And what these good people have said to us today and through the annual plan, and you heard from ADCOS, Grey Power, Age Concern and the seniors panel, that they would like to see council increase the stock of pensioner housing. It's that simple. Now, let me take you on a wee history tour back to 2002, when the council, in its wisdom, sold off 1,600 units.
Auckland City Council. Sorry, we just need to be really clear for our community.
We're biting.
Which councils did this, because you know, Auckland City Council sold, the other councils held on.
Councillor Brewer.
16,012 houses were sold off. It had a book value of $110 million. It was sold back to the government for $87 million. The reason I refer to this is there were 10,000 submissions against. And the reasons that were put up, very, very, very strong submissions against, was that the main one is that council has a moral obligation to provide housing for its pensioners or its older people. It's core business. And that's what these people are telling us today. We have a core business that in actual fact will lead to a decrease, because as you've heard, the population, I think by 2036, 1 in 4 New Zealanders, or Aucklanders rather, are going to be over the age of 65. By 2036. So if we are maintaining the level and the population over the age of 65 is going up, what we're actually doing is reducing markedly the stock. Wellington at the moment has 55 pensioner housing for every 1,000 people over the age of 65. Christchurch before 2012 had 47. Do you know what we have currently? 9. 9 pensioner units for every 1,000 people over the age of 65. And that can only get worse. So it's simply a wee change in direction, a wee change of words which will allow Panuku and therefore the Selwyn Foundation to increase our stock. And that's what we owe to the older people of Auckland. And that's what we're not seeing at the moment. I listened very carefully to Alan when he came to talk. Alan McGregor came to present to the seniors panel on pensioner housing for Panuku. And he said there is an expectation we would increase. That's what these words allow, an expectation. Well, actually, are we directing this council or not? Because to maintain at least the existing level is waffle. If we are directing, we say we would like to increase. So that's all. It's just a change of 5 words. And there will be, if there are financial obligations, we'll look into that too. But that's the response to the increasing population aged over 65. That's our response to the annual plan submissions. That's our response to the advocacy from these groups that came today. So I really look forward to your support, and let's move on from here.
Thank you, councillor. So that's been moved, and councillor Watson seconding.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Casey, for putting this motion forward. And I noticed that, and Councillor Lee would be interested to know in the use of the font and bold highlighting there. It is those two words, while increasing. They're the key words, and I think Mr. Rayner really made a valuable observation there when he said that this is really small in the overall context of the need that is required. It's a right move, but it's a start. It's a bit of a measured move, and as much as anything, it's just driven by sheer population dynamics. Councillor Casey referred to how we compare to Wellington and Christchurch, a few other places. Wellington City, I just had a look at the stats there. Their population is 203,000. Their number of units they own at over 40 locations are 2,200. That's not just housing for the elderly, that's social units. Auckland Council, by contrast, our population 1.57 million, that's nearly 8 times more. And we have 1,412 units for older people, and I don't think we have much other social housing stock outside of that. So they have, nearly 800 units more than us, and they have a fraction of the population. We had 43,000 Aucklanders in the last 12 months. That's 21% of Wellington City's overall population. So you can see just the sheer population dynamics show that we need to increase, and I refer again to the notion that this is just as a beginning. If we are to be socially aspirational, that is, we've got transport aspirations, we have events aspirations. If we're going to be aspirational for our older people, then we need to do something about this housing and play our part. We're not the sole answer, no one's saying that, but we're an important part of it. Of course we are. Councils are traditionally the go-to for people in the community, especially people who are a bit up against it. They go to their council, and we're the biggest council in New Zealand, and they've come to us, and they've come to us in some numbers. Just in terms of contributions, and I don't want to labour the Wellington comparison, but they're undertaking a $400 million upgrade, admittedly, in association with the government, $400 million in the upgrade of their units. That leads to the sort of comments in the community that Wellington Council has improved the standard of what people are living in over their city, little by little. This new housing for elderly development, 8.7 million in Marshall Court, social housing, including elderly, won a Wellington Architecture Award from the New Zealand Institute of Architects. So that's what Wellington's doing. Far more provision of numbers, dare I say it, on face value, a better standard of accommodation, and more important, obviously a sheer will to do something for those people, their elderly included, that are at the bottom end of things. And as Bill said, those elderly people are at the forefront of the vulnerable, and that's going to become increasingly so. So I don't think I need to say much more other than this is something that needs to be done. It's a beginning, but it's the right beginning, and it's a belated start to a need that's going to become ever increasingly apparent. So let's try and emulate our southern cousins and make this today a start to provide more for the elderly and to improve provision for the elderly in the same fashion that they've done in Wellington. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Watson. I'm going to just ask, before we carry on, I know Councillor Walker wishes to speak. I'm just going to ask Sue to clarify the ability for us, or the best place to have the strategic discussion, just to make sure that people are comfortable with the notice of motion, and that's annual plan versus LTP, just to make sure that we're not missing an opportunity here. And I guess we can't ask Sue to comment on this, but remembering that for the councils that did hold on to their older adult housing, the battle has been with governments of both persuasions to actually get support for that. You know, good for Wellington getting 400 million. It's nothing like close proximity to the seat of government to help, but I know out west we struggled both under the Labour and under the national governments to get any support, just saying. Sue, can you just give us that steer on LTP versus annual plan?
Certainly, Madam Chair. It is, in fact, a two-part process. The first part that relates to this notice of motion, the annual plan, is the fact that if there is unbudgeted operating expense that will be associated with developing this further, then that needs to be contemplated in this year's budget setting process. The second part of this is you will see and we have mentioned this, both Matthew Walker and I have mentioned this in previous annual plan workshops. We will be bringing forward to you at the workshop on the 28th of April, there will be more material being presented to you by Panuku Development Auckland on housing for older persons. There will also be work that we are doing to support that you will see come to you as governing body on the 25th of May. And that is actually the material that you are required to adopt for consultation. Madam Chair, there is a need to consult on this, and that we will do through the annual plan process. That will then, as a result of that, potentially subject to your decision making, mean that you may indeed need to bring more work forward for the 2018 long-term plan refresh.
Okay, that's useful, thank you. Councillor Walker, and then
I'd like
Councillor
to-
Nye, then Councillor Fletcher.
I'd like to support this motion, and I'll make some comments that complement those that Councillor Casey and Councillor Watson have made. I would suggest, as far as the Auckland plan is concerned, and also the unitary plan, that this motion is entirely complementary, because what it is looking at is more intensification in those areas where we already have the provision of housing for the elderly. So it is entirely complementary. I'd suggest that there are also economies of scale in terms of building, because if you have more building, it follows that hopefully it'll be cheaper. The other advantage is that people, and especially older people, like to be social, they like to be together, and often they've got common needs. And I know from my experience, from older people that I know, that is certainly the case. The existing situation where we've got already communities of older people in our pensioner housing works well, so why wouldn't you make it work even better? So this is sensible, it's urgent. Just as an aside, I was out last night, I was talking with some people, and they told me about some elderly people on the North Shore living in a garage right now, living in cold conditions, wondering how they're going to get through the winter because they simply cannot afford to live anywhere else. They're basically squatting. So that's what's happening right now. It's urgent and it's getting worse by the day. It's clear that the market does not deliver and will not deliver, because if you're a developer and you want to make money, you'll build arguably the most expensive property you can on a site because you'll make the most out of it. So this kind of housing, which is and needs to be inexpensive, is not going to be delivered by the marketplace. Who is going to deliver? Aside from the Salvation Army and other social housing providers, essentially it falls to the government and the council. I won't talk about the government. Obviously they're not going there. Certainly not this government, but this council can. And that is important. The other related comment, and it goes to the circumstance that elderly are in now, is if you've got money in a bank account, and that's a very secure place to have money, you're not making any money out of it. You're not getting any interest. Superannuation is hardly keeping pace. So housing, which is a fundamental need for people and for the elderly, is not being met. This is an opportunity for us to change the game. I'd urge every councillor to support this and to support it unanimously.